The sun burned high, cruel and merciless. She staggered through the dry grass, barefoot, her torn dress clinging to skin streaked with blood and dust. Each step cut her feet open on sharp stone. Her wrists were raw, the marks of rope etched deep into her flesh. Behind her, laughter rang out. Men's voices, mocking, hunting her like wounded game. The desert showed no mercy. Heat shimmered across the plain, the air heavy with the stench of sweat and dust. Her vision blurred, and still she pressed forward, clutching her swollen belly. Blood seeped through the thin fabric, dark and heavy. She whispered into the emptiness, lips cracked and trembling, "Please, don't let them take my baby." Her knees buckled. She fell hard, her palms scraping against the dirt, the scream caught in her throat. The sky spun above her, a white blaze without pity. Then, the sound of hooves. A shadow stretched long across the ground. A horse stopped, chestnut hide gleaming in the sun, dust swirling around its legs. The rider dismounted slowly. Broad shoulders, a wide-brim hat shadowing a weathered face. William Harlow had lived alone for more than a decade, his silence heavier than words. He was no stranger to death, but never had it arrived like this, collapsing at his fence line. He dropped to one knee beside her. With careful hands, he brushed aside the filthy fabric at her belly. Her body jerked violently, eyes flying open in terror. Her voice cracked, sharp with shame and fear. "Don't touch me there!" Will froze. Beneath the torn cloth was not only blood, but a crude carving, a jagged symbol burned deep into her skin. Not a wound of chance, but of cruelty. Her trembling hand clutched his wrist, strength born only of desperation. Her lips trembled with a whisper that split the heavy silence. "Please, don't let them take my baby." And above them, the desert carried only the sound of distant hooves, growing closer. The torches on the ridge swayed like hungry eyes. The voices behind them grew louder, coarse, laughing, eager. Will slid his arms under the woman's frail body. She stiffened in terror, her fingernails clawing at his shirt as if he were another predator. Her lips moved against his ear, broken and raw. Don't give me back." He carried her inside the cabin. The door creaked shut behind them, but thin walls of pine could never stop men determined to kill. Will laid her on his bed, the only one he owned. She curled sideways, clutching her stomach, the blood soaking deeper into the sheets. In the firelight, he finally saw her clearly. The symbol carved into her belly wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost ritualistic. He had seen men brand cattle with less cruelty. His hand hovered above the mark, and again her voice cut the silence like a blade. "Don't touch me there." Her eyes glistened with shame and fury. She pulled the torn fabric back over her wound, as if covering the scar could undo it. For a long moment, Will didn't move. The fire snapped, casting shadows across his face, every line hardened by years of silence. He fetched a strip of cloth, tore it with his teeth, and set it beside her. "You'll bleed out if it's not bound," he muttered, but his hands did not force their way. Instead, he placed the bandage within her reach. She hesitated, then gripped it weakly, trying to wrap herself, her hands trembling too much to finish. Finally, she let the cloth slip and looked at him with hollow eyes. It was not consent spoken aloud, but it was trust, the smallest seed of it. Will wrapped the wound, his rough hands gentle, as though afraid the desert itself might shatter her if he pressed too hard. Outside, the hoofbeats drew closer. Shadows flickered past the small window. The men were searching. Will set the rifle across his knees and sat at the edge of the bed. His voice was steady, low as the hum of the wind. "They won't take you." But he knew the night was far from over. The first knock rattled the cabin door like a gunshot. Then came a voice, low and certain. "She's ours. Hand her over, Tate." Will rose from the bed, rifle steady in his hands. The fire behind him threw a long shadow across the floorboards. Outside, torchlight danced against the window, painting the walls with fire. The woman stirred, eyes wide with fear. She tried to rise, but her legs gave way. "They'll kill me," she whispered. "They'll take the baby." Her words broke into sobs. Will's jaw tightened. He pulled the door open just enough to step out onto the porch. The dry night air hit him, full of dust and smoke. 3 riders waited, their faces twisted in cruel grins. The leader dismounted, spurs crunching the dirt. "She doesn't belong to you," the man said, "and if you don't give her up, your blood will soak this ground before sunrise." Will didn't answer. His rifle spoke for him, barrel leveled, hands calm as stone. The rider smirked. "You think one old man can stand against us?" He lifted his hand, and steel glinted in the torchlight. The shot cracked like thunder. One of the men toppled from his horse, dust exploding beneath him. The others scrambled, revolvers flashing. Bullets tore through the air, splintering the porch post beside Will's head. He dropped to one knee, firing back. Another rider screamed, clutching his chest as he fell. The last man wheeled his horse, shouting curses into the night. Torchlight scattered as he fled into the dark. Silence returned, heavy and sharp. Will lowered the rifle, his shoulder burning from the recoil. He turned back toward the cabin. Through the half-open door, he saw her watching, her torn dress hanging loose, her arms wrapped around her swollen belly, eyes filled with both terror and disbelief. For the first time since she stumbled into his yard, her lips moved without fear. "You didn't give me back." Will's gaze lingered on her, silent. The desert around them was quiet, but he knew quiet never lasted long. The night after the gunfire was restless. The desert had gone quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that pressed on the ears, waiting to break. Will sat by the fire, his shoulder wrapped in a strip of cloth, his rifle across his knees. Every so often he glanced toward the bed. The woman lay curled on her side, breathing shallow, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Sweat shone on her face despite the cool air. She stirred, her voice raw, almost broken. "They won't stop," he said. "I was chosen. My blood. My baby." Her words tangled into sobs. Will leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the rifle tighter. He had heard men talk about curses, rituals, desert prophets, always madness dressed as faith. Now he was seeing the cost carved into a girl's flesh. The fire popped, sending sparks into the dark. Will rose and crossed to her side. She flinched at first, then stilled as he sat on the edge of the bed. He did not touch her wound, only set a tin cup of water within her reach. "You'll rest here," he said quietly. His voice was firm, steady. "They won't take you." Her hollow eyes searched his face. For a moment something fragile flickered there, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. She gripped the cup with trembling hands, water spilling over her wrists. After drinking, she whispered, "Why risk it? I'm not worth the blood they'll spill." Will did not answer right away. He stared into the fire, the lines on his face carved deep by grief. His wife's grave lay in the earth behind the barn. He had lived with silence for years, but tonight silence was no answer. "Finally," he said, low and certain, "no one decides your worth but you, and as long as you're under this roof, they'll have to go through me." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her eyes welled, and for the first time, she let herself close them without fear. Sleep claimed her, light and fragile. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the distant sound of hooves again. Dawn bled slowly across the desert. The sky was pale, streaked with ash-colored clouds, the kind that promised no rain. The woman stirred awake, her body stiff with pain, but the terror in her eyes had eased. For the first time, she slept without flinching at every sound. Will was already outside, his boots planted in the dirt, rifle resting against the porch rail. His gaze swept the horizon. No riders. Only silence. But he knew silence never lasted. Inside, she struggled to sit. Her hands pressed against her belly, fingers tracing the bandaged scar beneath the torn dress. The child moved within her. She gasped, half in pain, half in wonder, and whispered to herself, "Please, don't let them take my baby." Her words carried out through the open door. Will turned. For the first time, his eyes softened, though his jaw stayed tight. He stepped back into the cabin, kneeling beside her. "You'll bring that child into this world," he said quietly, "and no one will lay a hand on either of you." Tears welled down her bruised face. She shook her head, whispering, "I'm broken." He made sure of it. Will shook his head slowly. He tried. "But you're still here. That's more than he counted on." She reached for his hand. Her grip was weak, trembling, yet her eyes finally held something more than fear, a flicker of hope. The fire had burned low, only embers left. The cabin smelled of smoke, blood, and pine. Outside, the wind carried the call of crows circling over empty land. For now, the riders were gone. For now, she was safe. And maybe that is what the West taught most brutally, that safety was never permanent, only borrowed. But sometimes borrowed was enough to let something new take root. So I ask you, if you were in Will's boots, standing against the night, would you have pulled the trigger or lowered the rifle? If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next Wild West tale.